The FBI agent kicked in the bathroom door, gun raised, heart racing, expecting the worst. On the other side stood a young man with a crisp Pan Am pilot uniform, a perfectly calm smile, and shaving cream smeared across his face. Frank Abagnale had pulled off the impossible again, and this time he was moments away from slipping past federal law enforcement in a hotel hallway crowded with real pilots. Before you blink, pause and think. How does a teenager vanish from armed agents multiple times without leaving a trace? If you are obsessed with scams, lies, and audacity that bends reality, subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Welcome to ScamSphere. Frank Abagnale was born in 1948 in Bronxville, New York, to a family that valued appearances, charm, and control. His father, a respected businessman, and his mother, a socialite, gave him a comfortable upbringing. But when his parents divorced during his teenage years, Frank's world fractured. His father struggled financially, his mother moved on, and Frank learned early that the world was governed by deception, appearances, and authority. He discovered a dangerous truth. Adults lie, systems are flawed, and people rarely question the confidence with which others present themselves. By 16, Frank ran away from home, carrying no money, no plan, only an audacious belief in his own charm and intellect. He quickly discovered banks' vulnerabilities, delayed processing of checks, clerks who trusted paper over people, and systems that rewarded conformity over scrutiny. His first scams were small altering deposit slips, exploiting bank delays, but the lessons were invaluable. Every fraud taught him the mechanics of trust, the psychology of compliance, and the thrill of bending systems without breaking the law. Soon, small frauds bored him. What fascinated Frank was authority itself, the uniform, the badge, the white coat. One day, he realized he could impersonate a pilot. Not to steal a plane, not to hijack a flight, but to command respect and gain access to every corner of the world that a real pilot could reach. He called Pan American World Airways, claimed he was a pilot who had lost his uniform, and requested a replacement. Nobody questioned it. Within days, a crisp uniform arrived at his door, master key to a kingdom of confidence. Once he had the uniform, the real work began. Frank forged Pan Am payroll checks with astonishing precision, cashing them across the United States for thousands of dollars at a time. The airline's jump seat policy allowed him to fly free, first class, to over 25 countries. He stayed in luxury hotels, dined in elite restaurants, and moved like royalty all while still a teenager. By the time he was 21, Frank had passed over $2.5 million in bad checks. Money that vanished before anyone realized it existed. But Frank's genius was not just in money. It was in timing, observation, and audacity. When confronted or questioned, he would lean slightly forward, offer a charming smile, and act offended at the suggestion of doubt. Confidence disarms suspicion. Authority commands obedience. And Frank had mastered both. The FBI took notice. Patterns emerged, bounced Pan Am checks, reports of a pilot who was everywhere and nowhere at once. Agent Carl Hanratty became obsessed with catching him. Hanratty was methodical, unrelenting, and increasingly irritated by Frank's audacity. Yet every time the agent closed in, Frank slipped through the cracks, including the infamous bathroom incident. Cornered mid-fraud, Frank apologized politely, claimed he was late for a flight, and walked past armed officers without breaking a sweat. Frank did not stop at airlines. Medicine became his next playground. He forged a Harvard medical degree and applied for work at a Georgia hospital. He became a supervising physician without performing surgery, delegating tasks to real doctors and learning just enough medical jargon to survive. One night, a baby nearly died because of his inexperience. For the first time, Frank realized consequences extended beyond money. They could cost lives. That night, he vanished again. Next came law. Frank forged a law degree, passed the Louisiana bar exam on his third attempt, and became a prosecutor. He worked alongside seasoned lawyers, leading cases and giving arguments, all while remaining a teenage imposter. Every role he assumed required observation, manipulation, and risk. He slept little, trusted no one, and moved constantly. Every position was both a disguise and a survival mechanism. By 1969, Frank's luck finally ran out. Interpol and French authorities arrested him, not in a daring chase, but in Paris, exhausted, cornered, and betrayed by the very systems he had studied. The glamorous life ended in the harsh, unyielding confines of European prisons. Yet even then, Frank's mind remained sharp. Prison became a study in authority, compliance, and the predictable weaknesses of institutions. Even behind bars, Frank adapted. He learned routines, observed hierarchies, and exploited the small openings that others ignored. He was a master at understanding human behavior, turning every interaction into a lesson in trust and manipulation. In a strange twist of fate, his notoriety became his value. The FBI, once obsessed with capturing him, began to see him as a resource. Banks, corporations, and law enforcement recognized his genius and potential as a consultant. Frank Abagnale's story is more than a tale of theft and escape. It is a story of human psychology, systemic vulnerability, and audacious brilliance. He exploited not only systems, but the trust that people naturally give one another. And in doing so, he became legendary, not just as a con artist, but as a cautionary figure whose life taught the world that appearances can deceive, and confidence can conquer nearly anything. Prison stripped Frank of everything he had once relied on: the crisp uniforms, the forged degrees, the charm that had opened doors across the world. Concrete walls replaced first-class lounges. Iron bars replaced polished desks. The thrill of audacity was gone, but not the mind behind it. Even in confinement, Frank studied patterns, guards' routines, inmates' hierarchies, and procedural weaknesses. He realized that all institutions ran on trust, and where there was trust, there was vulnerability. His world had shrunk to a cell, but his intellect remained untouchable, a weapon sharper than any forged check. At first, Frank kept his distance. Notoriety could be dangerous inside the prison system. Word had spread of the boy who had fooled airlines, banks, and government offices alike. Fellow inmates eyed him warily, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Frank navigated carefully, diffusing tension with humor, charm, and observation. He learned who could be trusted, who could be manipulated, and how to survive without creating enemies. Prison became a classroom for human behavior, a study in patterns, power, and influence that he had mastered long before entering the concrete walls. The FBI, however, had not forgotten him. Carl Hanratty, the agent who had chased him across the globe, kept a close eye. What had begun as relentless pursuit turned into cautious respect. Frank's audacity, intelligence, and understanding of deception were unmatched. Slowly, a radical idea formed within the Bureau. Perhaps this former criminal could be more valuable alive and consulted than imprisoned indefinitely. They approached him cautiously, aware of his reputation for manipulation, yet willing to explore a collaboration that had never been attempted with someone of his notoriety. Frank's first interactions with agents were a mixture of tension and fascination. He explained check forgery techniques, financial scams, and the psychology of con artists. Every demonstration was precise, meticulous, and at times humorous. He pointed out flaws that even experienced agents had overlooked, often with a sly grin that reminded them why he had eluded them for so long. His explanations were both a lecture and a warning. These were not tricks to admire, but vulnerabilities to fix. And Frank delivered them with the flair only he could muster. Supervised privileges followed. Frank was granted limited outings, access to files, and supervised interaction with law enforcement personnel. These were not freedoms, but trust earned through intellect, patience, and careful observation. He adapted quickly, turning each interaction into an opportunity to understand human behavior and institutional weaknesses. Every briefing became a lesson in deception, compliance, and systemic flaw. Frank had once deceived the world for personal gain. Now he used that knowledge to teach the world to defend itself. By the mid-1970s, Frank transitioned into full-time consulting. Banks, corporations, and law enforcement agencies invited him to lecture on fraud prevention. He demonstrated how a missing signature, a delayed verification, or a trusting clerk could allow millions to vanish. Executives leaned forward in disbelief. Auditors scribbled frantic notes, and agents whispered to one another as Frank recreated schemes that had once made headlines. His life, once a criminal playground, had become a living textbook in the art of deception and prevention. Despite his redemption, Frank remained haunted by the past. He remembered the people he had deceived: airline staff, hospital employees, prosecutors, and judges. Every interaction had required precise timing, acute observation, and psychological insight. Mistakes could have been catastrophic. Those memories, coupled with his continued work in fraud prevention, instilled in him a rare perspective. The systems that once failed him were now tools for safeguarding society. Knowledge, he had learned, could be weaponized, but it could also protect. Frank's consulting work expanded internationally. Governments, central banks, and multinational corporations sought his expertise. He advised on anti-fraud measures, banking security protocols, and identity verification techniques. He became a bridge between law enforcement and financial institutions, translating the mindset of criminals into practical defensive strategies. In every lecture and consultation, he combined dry humor, thrilling anecdotes, and technical precision. Even the most seasoned executives left sessions with chills, recognizing how vulnerable their systems truly were. Yet the thrill never fully disappeared. Frank confessed that he still remembered the adrenaline of slipping past agents, cashing fraudulent checks, and assuming identities that commanded trust. It was a thrill rooted not in crime itself, but in mastery over a flawed system. His genius had always been understanding human behavior: the hesitation, the assumptions, the blind spots. Now, rather than exploiting these weaknesses for personal gain, he exploited them to protect the innocent, prevent fraud, and teach others how to think like a con artist without becoming one. Frank also embraced education. He collaborated with universities, law schools, and corporate training programs to illustrate the psychology of deception. Students and executives alike marveled at the real-world lessons he delivered, not from textbooks, but from lived experience. He recounted the story of the hotel bathroom escape, the Pan Am uniforms, and the forged Harvard degree not as glorification, but as lessons in observation, confidence, and risk management. Each story was a masterclass in both suspense and practical learning. Throughout his career, Frank remained humble despite his fame. Awards and recognition came from banks, law enforcement, and industry groups. Yet he was never satisfied with accolades. His motivation was to prevent others from experiencing the chaos and destruction that he had caused. He understood the fine line between genius and recklessness, and he spent his life teaching institutions and individuals how to navigate that line. He became not a myth, but a mentor, someone who transformed criminal brilliance into societal benefit. Frank Abagnale's life demonstrates the fragile nature of trust. The power of confidence and the human tendency to assume appearances reflect reality. He proved that a single, intelligent, audacious individual could exploit systems designed to protect billions, and then use that same knowledge to safeguard them. The boy who had once vanished from law enforcement, tricked entire industries, and assumed multiple identities had become the world's most valuable anti-fraud consultant. Even decades later, Frank's stories continue to thrill, amuse, and educate. From teenage exploits to international consulting, his life is a testament to intelligence, courage, and audacity. The systems he once deceived now rely on his guidance. Institutions that had been blind to their own flaws learn to see. And the man who had once laughed at the FBI now helped them catch the very criminals he had once been. If you think Frank Abagnale's scams were thrilling, The work he did afterward is equally extraordinary. He turned a life of deception into a career of protection, teaching the world the limits of trust, the psychology of fraud, and the edge of audacity. And if you want more stories of scams that defy belief, subscribe to ScamSphere so you do not miss our next story, a tale that will make even Frank's exploits look like warm-up practice.